Welcome to Spectrum Perspectives, real talk with parents, professionals, and autism advocates. With your host, Cindy Gellermini.
Hi, everyone. This is Cindy with another episode of Spectrum Perspectives. And today I have a mom. Jerrica is on with us today. Hi, Jerrica. Welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you.
Every interview starts the same. We start at the beginning and we work up to where we are now. And you have a son that's a speller, right? We're going to talk about
Yeah.
that. So how many kids do you have altogether?
So we have three kids. Our oldest daughter is Eva. They all have summer birthdays, so she's about to turn 15 very soon. Our middle child, JD, which is our speller, he is about to turn 13. And then our youngest turns 7, and all within the next couple of weeks. Our youngest daughter is Anna. So we have Eva, JD, and Anna.
Okay, good. All right. So we're going to focus on JD. And when you were pregnant with him, were there any kind of red flags, anything the doctor said that, there may be an issue with this pregnancy?
Yeah, everything was really normal all the way up until the very end when I did test positive for Group B strep, which is like a common screening that they do.
Hmm.
And because I tested positive for that, they did induce the delivery. And he was basically born while I was hooked up to IV antibiotics because, I was told that that could be passed to the baby and, have life threatening consequences. And then the night that I was induced and I was hooked up to all the monitors and everything, they did notice that whenever I would lay on my left side, that JD's heart rate would drop. And so they used positioning, throughout that night until he was born the next day around noon to keep his heart rate normal. But like I said, anytime I would move or shift around, his heart rate would kind of drop. Um, when he was born, he did have the cord wrapped around his neck, which would explain why, that was happening. And so I feel like I remember the doctor saying that it was loosely wrapped around his neck. My husband feels like it was a little bit more tighter than what I, thought it was in the moment. But he still, when he was born, met all of the screenings and everything. Everything was normal. There wasn't any indication when we left the hospital that anything was wrong. So his birth was, fairly normal, minus, those couple of things that were different than the births of both of our
I mean, don't they
girls.
do ultrasounds, up until before I'm trying to remember when the last one is before the birth. Like, why didn't they see that there was a cord wrapped around his neck? I mean, unless it
Yeah,
happens at the end, I don't
I
know.
have so many questions looking
I
back. And of
know.
course, autism, kind of causes you to go down a whole different medical road because Western medicine just has like very little to offer you. And so
Yeah.
it's like, if I knew now, if I knew then what I
Then what
do
you
now,
know now.
I would have asked a lot of different questions, but,
Yeah, I know. Unfortunately, we learn much later. And then, so how about his development? Was that on time?
So the first several milestones were fine as far as like sitting up. He walked on time. He had some early language, mama, dada. He would always say amen when we prayed at the table, like over meals. But right around his first birthday, I really started noticing that there were some, things that I was concerned about. He was actually regressing in language when that should have been a time that language was really exploding. And he was not playing with toys appropriately. So, he just climbed everything, he lined things up. He the only toy that really held his interest were like throwing a ball. He just didn't engage in floor play. And his older sister is only 2 years older than him, not even quite 2 years. And so I had just gone through all of those stages with another baby. And, my husband kept saying, he's a boy, he's different, her language is different, he's okay. But within a few months, he recognized a lot of it as well. And then came across a video actually on Facebook of what autism looks like in young children.
Oh,
And I had
yeah.
already kind of sought his blessing on reaching out for like an EI screening. and which is
Wait, what is
early.
that? What's an EI screening?
It's early intervention. So
Oh,
in the
oh,
state of Illinois,
yeah,
they have
yeah.
early intervention, and
Mhm.
they'll come into your home and do speech therapy and all of that. And I had a friend who had worked with early intervention, and so I knew that that's who I needed to contact. But I didn't want to do that until we were both on the same page, with the issues that we were seeing. So it took him a little bit longer, but he came across that video, and I walked in the door one day from work, and he said, "Hey, I have to show you something," and it was the video that he had found, and he said it is time to make that phone call. JD was, I think by the time EI started, he was like 18 months old, and we were having, 3 times a week therapy of speech and OT and developmental therapy. So our journey started early, which is good. But yeah,
So he was about a year old then?
he was like a year old when I first started having my gut instincts that something was
Yes.
wrong.
But by the
And I
time your
was
husband caught on, he was what?
He
Close
was
to
about
18?
18 months old by the
Yeah.
time all of the like therapies actually started.
Yeah.
So
Because
yeah,
that's a typical time when people start seeing it is more like 18 months. You were a
yeah,
little early.
yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting that he saw it on Facebook. So Robbie, he was diagnosed in 1992. There was no internet back then.
Mhm.
I couldn't even go to the library and look up things on autism. There was just nothing out there. So at least you guys have resources that we didn't have.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, so then he started doing the early intervention. Did you get an official diagnosis of autism?
So they kind of encouraged us to wait until a little closer to his third birthday, just, for a little bit more accurate of a diagnosis, as far as, what level and all of that. And so I think he was about 2.5 when we started the process of getting the evaluation scheduled. He was evaluated right around 3, and then early intervention helped us transition him right away into public preschool when he was 3 years old. And that was a really gut wrenching time because even though I knew it was coming, you just sit through screening after screening where they tell you, like, your child, is basically mentally 6 months old. And it's just so deficit based. And it's just basically like, okay, well, my child can't do anything. And you just sit in meeting after meeting and hear professional after professional just pound that in. And I think I had handled it fairly well up until that point. And then it was like, okay, what does the future of this look like? Like, you know, what does his future look like? What does our future look like? So that time of his diagnosis was really like a low point for me for sure, just going through all of
Hmm.
that.
Yeah. And then you said he was in public school?
Yeah, he's been in public school since he was 3. The district that he's in had recently started an autism program. They call it structured teaching. And so he started right away in the preschool version of that and then has moved up through it ever since.
And so it's an autism class that he's in. So did
Yeah.
they ever does he ever go in with the other kids for anything?
They do specials with their developmentally appropriate peers, and they go into general education for like morning meetings. So there are a couple times throughout the day. Kids who have a little bit more verbal ability sometimes join some of the other classes, like reading or math, just based on evaluations. But until spelling, everything that we knew about JD was that he was functioning basically like a toddler. And so those opportunities really haven't been available for him.
Yeah. Yeah. I Unfortunately, I always thought that about my son too, that he was mentally a toddler, and I would tell everybody that he's mentally a
Mhm.
toddler. So if you just treat him that way, then you'll understand him. And
Mhm.
and I would explain that to his caregivers, and I'd say, well, that means you have to help him in the bathroom, you have to cut his food, you have to help him get dressed. But Robbie would get very like fidgety and anxious when I was having that conversation, and I'd be like,
Mhm.
okay, okay, I'm sorry, you're not a baby. Like I could, and that's times like that I could tell he understood what I was saying. But if
Mhm.
I gave him a command, like, okay, go hang your shirt up in the closet or something, nothing. And I
Yeah.
knew nothing about apraxia, nothing. So we'll get to that. We'll get to that.
Yeah.
But you're saying the same thing, that
Mhm.
that's what people think because they don't understand.
Mhm.
And because it's what that because the IQ test and everything is put this
Motor
block in this
base.
hole. Right. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep, it's all motor based. You're right. Okay, so when did you learn about spelling?
So this is an interesting story. Faith is like the foundation of our family. And
Wait, hold
so,
on. I was gonna back. I just realized that I wanted to ask you that first before
yep.
the spelling question, because you
Okay.
mentioned that when you prayed, he would say amen. So I wanted to know a little bit about your faith story as well.
Yeah. Both of my husband and I grew up in the church, more conservative, branches of the church, but grew up with strong faith in both of our families.
Mhm.
We actually first met each other at a church camp. And so
Can
God
I
was a
ask
part
what
of our life.
denomination? Just because as a Christian,
Yeah.
it helps
Yeah.
me
It's called the
clarify.
Church of, both of us grew up in the Church of Christ.
Okay.
And so when we started, raising a family, we were there. We've kind of bounced around into some other things as well, because we've seen God work in some ways that the Church of Christ doesn't necessarily believe in, such as like the gifts of the Spirit.
Mm.
But just amazing people. We still, go to church there on occasion. Just the most loving people, just foundational to shaping both of us in our faith. Both of us in our early 20s, kind of lived a different lifestyle, but like God was just in both of our hearts. And as soon as we got married, I would say we both, really started finding our way back to Him. And by the time we had kids, we knew that we wanted to raise them with a strong faith, like both of us had had. And so bedtime prayers and all of that has always been a part of, we pray at every meal. We talk about God all throughout the day. We try to look at all of our life circumstances through the lens of the Bible. And so, God literally revealed spelling to me in about five different, very unlikely ways in a period
Wow.
of about 6 months.
Wow.
Um, so I don't know, I feel like a lot of autism moms can relate to this, but you just kind of ebb and flow in your capacity to take on like new therapies, new ideas, try something else, read another book. And so I've had times where I'm just completely shut down. Like I don't have one more brain cell to devote to that. So whatever anybody tells me is just like flying over my head.
Mhm.
And or I'm tucking it away for like, yep, maybe someday
Right.
when some space opens up.
Right. Right. It's like
Um,
having too many emails in your mailbox. It's like,
you
yep, just
just
mark that one unread and I'll get to it eventually, but you don't.
Exactly. And so, someone, and I can't even remember who it was at this time, but someone first told me about the Spellers documentary. And I thought, you know what, I want to watch that at some point in time. And I had brought it up to my husband a couple times. Hey, there's this documentary I want to watch, but we just, hardly ever get time to sit down in front of the
Yeah.
TV.
And
And
that
it
was
was
only
like,
2 years ago.
yeah,
Yeah. So this is all
uh,
recent. Okay.
yes. And then, okay. So someone that my dad worked with like over 20 years ago just randomly reached out to him, I think through Facebook Messenger and said, "Hey, I'm going to drop something off on your porch. Can you send me your address?" And it was a Reader's Digest, which I didn't even really know existed anymore. And it had a sticky note on a page about a boy with autism who used a letterboard to communicate. So that was my second one. Someone that I worked with over
Yeah.
20 years ago, haven't, had any continued communication with. She sat next to someone at a baby shower who was talking about spelling. And she purchased a book for me and asked me to come over and pick it up and had printed out some papers about spelling, continued to reach out to me. And then through another chain of events, I'm a teacher by nature. And about 3 years ago, I left the classroom and I'm now a reading coach. So I travel back and forth between a couple of different schools. And due to some things that happened in the school district, I was moved into a school that houses an autism program. And it's the same program that my son went all the way through elementary. So he left the elementary, and then the very next year, I started working at that school. And one of my new coworkers heard about the telepathy tapes and started listening to a couple episodes and said, "Hey, I want to recommend this podcast to you. I'm really not sure how I even feel about it, but I just keep having the urge to tell you about it." And so did a little research, and my husband was kind of like, "Okay, this feels new agey. I don't know how I feel about this. Like, And so then the very next morning, we had all parted ways. We had dropped our kids off for school. He was actually sitting, waiting to drop our son off. And I had just gotten to work and I got a phone call from him and I picked up the phone and he was crying and he said, we need to listen to this podcast. And I said, okay. And he had found an article. It had come up in one of his Christian feeds that he reads in. And it was an article that Tani Cullen had
Oh,
written from Josiah's journey. And it was talking about how through a letter board, Josiah started talking, but not only talking, but also prophesying and revealed this deep knowledge of God. And he said, I think we've been looking at JD's autism wrong all this time. We started the telepathy tapes and we started the Spellers documentary like at the same time. So it was like a Friday night or something. We watched the Spellers documentary,
mhm.
and something in my head was just like, I wonder if JD can do this. And he was not in the room with us when we watched it, but he was like hooting and hollering in the other room while it was on.
Yeah,
And at the time, I was not making any kind of
right.
connection,
You didn't
about
realize that he could hear it. Yeah.
it's crazy to the
Mhm.
point that like our ceiling is shaking and like we can hardly hear it and we're like starting and stopping it, like a lot of movies that we try to watch.
Mhm.
And long story short, we had bought him a toy like the Christmas before called a Speak and Spell, and it's this old toy from like the 80s that we were like, oh, he loves letters because he's loved letters since he was a little boy.
Mhm.
And he started typing like just pushing, taking my hand. It's facilitated communication, but he would grab my hand and he would point to these succession of letters and I'm like, oh my gosh, like he is spelling out words. And so we found this little notebook that I had made him when he was a baby because he loved letters and numbers and shapes and colors. And it was like a preschool little notebook, and it had the alphabet on it, and they were a little bit bigger than on the toy. And he would do it. He would spell things out on either the toy or the notebook. Um,
This is before or after the Spellers movie?
this is right after we watched the Spellers movie, like
Oh,
that
okay.
same day, the next day. We're talking, he just started doing this.
Okay.
So I'm like, okay,
He's
these
trying to
letters
show
are,
you I can spell.
yes. So I'm like, these letters are so close together on both of these that it's really hard for me to sometimes tell like which letter he's actually pointing at.
Mhm.
So I went, and I'm sure this is going to appear backwards, but I just found a little piece of paper that you could print out for free online. And he
That's the
literally,
typewriter keys. Okay. Yeah.
yes,
So that's not in alphabetical order. That's in the
it's
order
not,
that's on your keyboard.
because at that point in time, I didn't know anything about spelling to communicate,
Right.
like besides, what I had seen on the documentary.
Right.
And I thought, well, if, my goal is to have him typing, maybe I should teach him the letters of, in the keyboard order.
Hmm.
So he started spelling things out on that for me right away. The very next day after we watched the Spellers documentary, both of our girls had plans, and we took him solo to Steak and Shake, and he spelled out the sentence, Jerrica, I know God. That was his first sentence that he spelled out.
And he
And
called you Jerrica, not mom.
he did. And he does frequently. Yep. And I don't know, why
Okay.
he tells me he does that because that's what he hears God call
Oh,
me.
yes. Okay. All right. I like that. Okay.
So that's kind of getting into a whole nother, piece of the puzzle. But as he started talking more, 80% or more of it was about God. And a
And that's
little,
very common. It's very common. So like we're both on the Spellers page, right, on Facebook, and you see what all, the other moms are sharing what their kids are saying, and they're always talking about God, always.
yes. And I had like just a very tearful conversation with my husband because I shared that like during his diagnosis, and then, through different times over the years, I would have wrestling matches with God. And one of the biggest ones was I don't know how to process like salvation for him because he is childlike, and that's what I thought. So is he safe because he doesn't have the mental capacity to believe, on his own? And, we searched the Bible about that and just wrestled with that for so long. And I just at one point told God, like, I can't believe that you're good if you would allow him to not go to heaven because he can't, make a confession or choose to get baptized on his own will. And I'm not going to choose that for him. I think, each person has to choose that. And at night,
So that's very interesting because I had thought about those things as well.
mhm,
But to me, Robbie was a baby, right? To me, he
mhm,
was mentally a toddler, right? And so if you look at Old Testament, they go through their bar mitzvah at 13 years of old, right? That's when they become of age, and that's when it's time for them to make their own decision if they want
yeah,
to follow God or not. The Catholic Church does the same thing with the confirmation. Protestant churches do it as well. And it's always around that age, around 13. That's when they come of age. That's when they feel they're old enough to make their own decision. So
mhm,
I always felt that since Robbie was mentally two, he came
mhm,
under that period of grace where he's not old enough, or mentally aware enough to make that decision on his own. I just
yeah.
felt that I don't remember how I came to that conclusion. I don't know if that was something I felt God showed me or I just came to it myself. And I'm just sharing this for our viewers.
Yes.
Because
And
I'm eventually going to interview a Catholic priest. I'm not Catholic, but he specializes in certain things that come up in telepathy. So I'm going to interview him. So that's why I'm bringing this
oh,
up.
that's awesome.
It's
Yeah.
a good segue.
So going back a little bit, at night, we have this routine as a family where we lay down in JD's room, after everybody's brushed their teeth and taken a shower. And JD, a lot of times will pay attention to his tablet. He's not very much of a technology kid. He's an outside, feet on the ground, climbing, jumping, running, all day long. But at night, his tablet would actually kind of calm him down and actually give him like an ability to stay in bed, whereas otherwise he would like want to get up. So he would a lot of times get his tablet and he would be simmering down, and the girls would trickle in and we would all get into the room and we would do a little Bible reading and we would pray as a family. He could be like almost asleep laying there. And when we would start praying, he would get up and he would run like a crazy person back and forth in his room and he would shriek. And I would have it out with God over that too, because it's like, okay, we're trying to make him a part where he is still hearing the Bible, but like we can't even get a Bible story out. We can't get any prayers out. We can't hear each other. Like, why is this like so, amping him up all the time? And I would just, like I said, like just, this is so frustrating. And when he started spelling, it all started making sense because he sees angels. And when we, are praying, there are angels in the room and he sees them and he
Mhm.
is literally worshiping them at that time. And so spelling has changed the way I see all of his behaviors that before I felt so frustrated by or did not understand the purpose behind. It's like, oh my goodness, no, there's purpose. He was shrieking when we were watching the Spellers movie because he had premonition that his life was about to change.
Absolutely.
Um,
Absolutely. Yeah. I just want to clarify one thing. You said that he was worshiping the angels. I think he was worshiping with the
with,
angels, not
yes,
worshiping the
I
angels.
misspoke.
We want to
Yes,
clarify
absolutely.
that.
With,
Clarify
yes,
that
with,
because I've heard that 100 times at church. We don't worship the
yes.
angels. And the Spellers movie. Okay. So a couple of years ago, I I interviewed Tawny Cullen and I interviewed Katie Asher and I had them I do retreats for moms of autistic kids. And this year I had Katie and her son Houston as my keynote speaker. And like 2 nights before the retreat, I had a dream that I was outside a hotel. I was on a grassy field, standing by my car, and it was like there was going to be a baseball tournament, and all these kids in teams in baseball uniforms were walking by me. They just kept slowly walking by me and on their way up to a hill, on the way up to a grassy hill. And on the way there, one of the kids tossed me a baseball, and I tried to catch it, but I missed it. And then I went inside, and it was like my retreat was going on, and the moms were lined up for lunch. And there were two tables, and one table had no food, And I told them, I said, no, no, go to the other buffet because you'll be fed over there at that other buffet. Okay. And I realized after I wake up, because I'm very into dreams and, I feel like God, I know it's a God dream when I can totally remember it when I wake up and I write it down and I pray and I ask God for the interpretation. It wasn't till after the retreat, Katie told me that she says, "Oh, yeah, Houston said that there was a lot of guys a lot of activity on the hill that night." I said, "What's the hill? I don't know what you're talking about." Right. Well, she said, "Well, that's where a lot of the guys with the telepathy, they all meet and they just call it the hill and they meet there to talk." And a lot of them were there that night and they were really excited because you were going to be teaching all of their moms about spelling because none of them had ever heard of it before. And all of these kids were so excited because they said, "Now my mom will know."
Oh, puts
And that like
goosebumps.
blew me away. So that's what was going on with your son when you were watching the Spellers movie, right? They're just waiting. They're just waiting for that moment when their parents wake up and get this revelation. Like, how is it
Mhm.
going to come? So,
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah, and mentioning Katie and Tani, so, obviously they're two of the more public, figures when you start, doing any amount of research into this. And so when JD started spelling, we didn't know how to make sense out of what was happening.
Yeah.
I mean, we watched the Spellers documentary on January 30th of this year. Okay, so that was like 4 months ago. And this is all transpired in
This is
this.
only in the past 4 months?
This is 4 months, okay? This entire story that I'm going to share. So, like,
Yes.
we've just been like a sailboat in wind, just getting blown here. Like, we didn't know up from down, okay? And
Yeah.
so, we listened to the telepathy tapes, and we ended going, it's undeniable that this is real. JD is doing in front of our eyes some of the things that they're talking about, but also too, there were a few things just because of I think how they were edited and just the narration of some of it that were like, how do we rectify some of this with a Christian perspective and
Yes.
worldview?
Me as well. Yeah.
We ended in kind of a really dark place of like even questioning like, oh my gosh, like is JD somehow tied to something dynamic? Like, we had to wrestle through some really hard questions. And Katie and Tani were both like so instrumental to us as far as pointing us towards other things to listen to, giving us scripture to walk us through some of those issues where we were really stuck.
Yeah,
Um,
because some of the people that they interview, the kids are talking about their past lives and
yes,
reincarnation and,
yeah,
mixed in with people like Tawny, that she's definitely a Christian. She's in ministry. And then, and some of it sounds very new age. So it can get confusing. And
yes.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
so we ended it in a really dark place, but both Tani and Katie have been so helpful in just pointing us towards, listen to this, here's scripture that, supports, this understanding. And it's just been mind blowing to think that, like, you've read the Bible and you've been a follower, pretty much your whole life, and yet you've really missed, some things that are there, but you've just either read over them or just, explained
Mhm.
them away or, looked at them in a different
Mhm.
way. And so we're still, in the process
Well,
of
it's just like
fleshing.
you said in the very beginning, the church that you were going to doesn't believe in the gifts of the Spirit.
Mhm.
It's like, well, they're missing out on a lot of stuff.
Yeah. And we had kind of thankfully been on about a 10-year journey before this started, where my husband actually had a time where he just spoke in tongues, really out of a deep depression and just crying out to God, and had no idea what happened or how it happened or anything because I, believe that this,
You believe in
ceased.
it. That stopped 2,000 years ago. Right.
Yes. And
Yeah.
you're like, okay, well, apparently it has not ceased because it happened to me and I wasn't looking for it or trying to do it or anything else.
Yeah.
So we had been on a journey of really just looking, hard at some of those things and just studying the spiritual gifts and knowing that, like, a lot of the missionaries that we follow, see miracles daily in other countries where they're working. They see healings, they see these things. So we believed, but we're just like, we're not seeing that. So we kind of believe that the church in America is a little bit sick. Like some of our knowledge has almost taken us
Yeah.
away from God as far and not closer to him. We've lost some of that ability to just raw believe, in that spiritual power that is God.
Right. Right. Oh, and we can get into a whole discussion about this, but
Yeah,
I don't want to get
sure.
sidetracked because I've been through the 80s, which was the whole Word of Faith movement and, the whole thing. And you could get the church has definitely gotten very sidetracked. Um, so let's talk about the telepathy a little bit. So are you experiencing that with your son?
So we actually listened to the telepathy tapes a little bit out of order. We listened to episode 8 first, because when we were like, let's dabble our toe in this, we were like, okay, we know that Christians are featured on episode 8, which
Okay.
is Josiah's episode.
And
And
Tawny. Yeah.
yes. And
Okay.
so we listened to that and we were like, okay, there's enough here to like pique our curiosity and to not like send us running. So then we listened to, 1 through 10. And
Just the word
sometimes,
telepathy alone will send Christians running. They'll be like,
yes.
no, that's demonic. Yeah.
And I think I would have been in that camp. And I actually think that if my own son hadn't have immediately started showing me that what they were saying was true, that I would have kind of had that religious spirit over me
Right.
saying, I don't believe this.
Right.
And so I try to have compassion on the fact that that's where a lot of people are at, because
Right.
I had the blessing of going, well, they said that this is true, and I can actually put this to the test in my own house. And GD, he's not like 100% like Houston is, where you could show him an Uno card, show me an Uno card, and he will, say it. He probably, in the few little testings that we done, can do it like 70 to 80% of the time. But where I started knowing is that the episode of the telepathy tapes where John Paul passes away was obviously heartbreaking.
Mm.
And I think that's actually also episode 8. So we had listened to that episode first before we had any of the background of who John Paul even was. So I was like super sad. That was, horrible to hear and to think about, that happening. But then when I went back and listened to 1 through 7 and knew like more of his past and his family and, who he was as a person, I listened to episode 8 again, and I was out running errands. It was before parent teacher conferences. So I went into work a little bit later that day, and I listened to that episode in the car, and I was just tears streaming down my face. And I got home that night, and JD immediately wanted to spell with me. And he said, "You're very sad that someone died on the hill." And I'm like, "Someone died on the hill? Like, what are you talking about? Like, who was it?" And I didn't connect it immediately, but he knew that I had listened to that and that I had been deeply moved by it. And so after I started realizing, oh my gosh, he knows what I'm not, what I'm doing, even when he's not with me, he's hearing my thinking. Now he does it every day. So I have, this little tradition that I do where on my lunch break, I try to leave and go sit in my car and just read my Bible and meditate on God's word and pray over him and my family on my lunch break. And when I walk in the door every day, he will say, "I'm so glad you prayed for me today." And if it happens to be a crazy day at work and I didn't get a lunch, he will say, "You didn't pray for me. You need to pray for me right
Yeah.
now." So like his, telepathy or whatever, word people are comfortable with is it shows up in things like that. It's not
Right.
that he's guessing, what Uno card I'm looking at, not that those experiments aren't
No, but he's
powerful.
connected to you. Do you find that can he do this with his father or the sisters, or is just you?
So he can, but it's definitely a greater degree with me.
Right. It
Um,
usually is.
he literally says that our minds are connected.
Yep.
And he goes through really, he goes through a lot of struggles. Like this gift comes with at a price for these kids, because when you have a spiritual gift like what they have, you get attacked.
Mhm.
And he's under constant attack, and he asks for constant prayer. And his way of saying it now that he's under attack is, I'm hopeless. And so he will spell out to me on his letterboard, Mom, I'm hopeless. You have to pray. I'm hopeless.
Mm.
Um, and he says that his spiritual gift, his biggest gift, is being a hope giver. So when we started talking to him about, what are you seeing, on the hill, or when you're, in this other state of consciousness, and he's talking about heaven, and he's talking about seeing Jesus or seeing God or seeing angels, he spelled out, my spiritual gift is I am a hope giver. And his angel that, I don't know if you've covered this in other episodes, but each of them have an angel. I know Houston talks about his angel being
I don't think
Esther.
we've talked about this. No.
Okay, well, each of them have an angel that are pretty much assigned to them, and his angel's name is Hope.
Huh.
And so he is a
Of
hope
course it
giver.
is.
His angel's name is Hope.
Mhm.
And he started telling us like ahead of time, like, Hope is being called away today. She's on another assignment. And on those days, he will like let us know that, because he's going to go under much greater attack. And
Huh.
he needs it to be almost constantly covered in prayer. So we're still piecing so many bits of this together. It's hard to even be able to just like, explain it in a way that makes sense, because half the time I'm still trying to understand it myself.
Right.
But he,
So I'm curious now because I believe everybody has a guardian angel that's with them all the time, right? So I'm wondering, is Hope his guardian angel, or it's just an extra one? It's the angel of hope that's assigned to him because that's his gift.
yeah, I have the same questions. I do believe that everyone has an angel, and I do believe that he has confirmed that to us through conversations.
Hmm.
Um, he says that angels are kind of a topic that he's off limits for talking about. So there's
Oh,
times where he will like occasionally give us little
yeah.
snippets. But if we start asking him a lot of questions, he
He'll
will
shut
say
down.
these are bad questions. Like, I can't
Yeah.
answer this. You're going to get me in trouble even
Yeah.
sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I think, the angels are meant to probably just be a little bit mysterious to us as humans as to,
Yeah.
what they do. But
So we
I
don't
know,
worship them.
yeah, I know that his angel is really, really paramount, really, to him being able to do, his spiritual gift. And so he will say, so and so is hopeless. We could go to a park, and he will see someone, and he will say that person is hopeless, and he will try to go near them. Obviously, he can't speak words to them, but he will, want to give them hope, and that is his gift. And so when he says, I'm hopeless, it's like he's literally given all the hope he had away. And
Yes.
now he needs to be, replenished. And
Replenished. Right.
yeah,
So if he sees somebody in the park that doesn't have hope and he doesn't go speak to them, what does he do? Does he want to just walk by them or sit near them or what?
yes. And sometimes, so we call it JD love, but from a very early age, his way of showing love is to press his forehead to yours.
Yes.
And so we always say that if you get a forehead bump from JD, like, he has pulled you into the inner circle, like and so sometimes he will even want to do that to a stranger. And
Yeah.
obviously, that's not necessarily respecting the physical boundaries of someone that's a stranger, but
Hmm.
he has just a deep compassion for people who he recognizes as hopeless, without God. Sometimes I think it might be someone who's depressed or anxious. But I think for sure, someone without God who he
Right.
recognizes just
That's sweet.
needs God. So yeah.
Yeah.
So when JD first started spelling, and he was, saying all these things about God, he would say every single time, the God of Israel.
Oh.
And we're like, why does he do that? Like, he would say, the God of Israel wants everyone to love. The God of Israel wants me to bring hope to this person. Every message that he would spell out, the God of Israel. And
Mhm.
so that has actually really led us to looking into some of like the Jewish, that Jesus was Jewish. And there's so much to that, we don't understand or necessarily bring that context into, when we're reading the Bible. And that isn't something, even though he grew up in a Christian home and we were reading the Bible to him every day and we were praying, we never referred to God as the God of Israel, unless maybe we were reading that in the Old Testament. And so that was something that jumped out at us right away, is like, why does he say that? And so that's kind of led us also down, some different trails of connecting with, we listen to a lot of things from the First Fruits of Zion, and Katie actually went on their podcast, and that's a really good one to listen to too, where she kind of dives into, some of the things that didn't always land well with us in the telepathy tapes, but then there's like some Jewish literature that explains some of it as well.
Hmm. Yeah, I had interviewed Heidi Rome, and she was Jewish, and her son was a speller as well, and he talked about a lot of spiritual things about um, how he remembered being in heaven before he was born, right? Which is Jeremiah 1. And I'm a lover of the Old Testament because my brain thinks in pictures. And
Hmm.
so I have to see the whole story played out,
Hmm.
so I want to see, David, slaying Goliath, and play out the whole story like a movie in my head. Whereas New Testament, when you read, Romans and Galatians, Ephesians, all that, it's just like, do this, don't do that. And my mind is like trailing off
Hmm.
somewhere.
Yeah,
So
for
that's just
sure.
me personally. So as soon as you say the God of Israel, my ears perk up right away.
Yeah, yeah. And with the Jeremiah one, JD has said that too, that he, remembers being in heaven before, being here. He calls himself a spirit. I was a spirit,
Yeah,
and so that was another one that was like, how do we make sense out of this? And then you go to Jeremiah 1 and you're like, I knew you before I knit you in the womb. And you're like, wow, I've read that how many times, but never did my mind even stop on that detail and go, well, what does that mean?
yeah,
So this has really definitely made us evaluate scripture,
yeah,
in
yeah.
a different way.
And when I have, for years been looking into the near death experiences, people that are have never died, but their spirits leave, go to heaven, come back. I've read these books and stuff, and they talk about that. They talk about how being kind of in the belly or the womb of God, all these spirits are in there, and then they come up, and it's like my turn to go, and I think they're part of the decision making of where they're going to go, and then
Mhm.
they shoot down here, and I think this is just my own trying to figure things out in my head. I think that babies are still very connected spirit in their spirit because
Yeah.
they just drop straight down out of heaven, and I think
Yes.
that babies do see angels and stuff in their room. You
Yeah.
can see them giggling in their crib like they're laughing like somebody's there. And
Yes.
and over time that part of their brain starts to slowly close
Mhm.
off. Katie
Yeah.
talks about this. She says, but with our kids, our non-speakers, it never closed off, and they're still connected and just kind of going back and forth, and they're having all these heavenly angelic experiences because they
Yeah.
they still see it.
Yes. And the more this has opened the door to listening to a lot of NDE
Mhm.
stuff for us. And that is how I first was able to wrap my mind around this, is just he's seeing and explaining the same things that these people see. Like it's almost identical the way he'll describe something, and then you'll hear someone describe an NDE, and it's
Yep.
like, that's exactly how he says it. And so
Yep.
to me, I'm like, okay, I have no trouble accepting an NDE. Why am I having such trouble accepting the fact that, like, because he is so disconnected from his body, which is living proof right in front of me every day, that his mind is able to experience God and to experience that in the same way, and,
Right.
and that is, I think they're parallel.
Yep. Yeah. And we were talking about this off camera, but I'll bring it up again about how, Katie talks about with Houston that he can hear sounds in the trees. Like one day he got distracted because they were cutting down a tree across the street, and he could hear the tree crying. Or she talks about the vibrations in rocks, and how sensitive he is to frequencies, and frequencies and vibrations, and Wi-Fi drives him crazy, and he loves rocks because he can pick up on the certain frequencies in rocks. And as a Christian, you think, oh, geez, this is new age. They're talking to the trees. They're talking to the rocks or whatever. But when you really look at scripture, but the Bible talks about, like Jesus said, if you don't praise me, even the rocks will cry out, right?
Mhm.
Or the Psalms talking about the trees, how the trees will worship. But
Mhm.
worship God. And I think there's so much more to creation than we know or understand. And these kids know a whole lot more than we do.
Yes. Yes.
A
And
whole lot more. We're
and
much more
hearing.
closed-minded.
Yes. Yes.
So the spelling, so basically you never went for any kind of classes or to see a practitioner. He just sort of picked it up on his own, just the two of you together.
So that's how it started.
Mhm.
And he's still, that's his like very functional every day. I want to know what you want for dinner. He's requesting prayer. He spells prayers out for other people like that. Pretty much any communication with him. However, I think it was either March. So he first started doing this at the very tail end of January. And then I think in either March or April, we started S to C lessons with a practitioner. So he currently has two methods of spelling kind of going on simultaneously. He is very much affected by apraxia. And I knew nothing about apraxia until this all started. Not one doctor, not one clinician, nothing has ever said that word to me. Um, and so I think really reading the Speller's Guidebook, where they do such an amazing job really breaking down, like, why can't they produce speech? Why can't they control their body? Like, well, they have a motor disorder. And obviously, autism has been, sold to us and explained to us as a cognitive disorder. So it's been a whole shift in thinking. But for JD, he says he cannot feel his hands. And
Mm.
so for him, the spelling to communicate is a very grueling task. You would think because most people who see him spell on, the letterboard that I held up, which is just our little homemade, they're like, I don't know how you know what he says because he does it so fast. I mean, he's just like, it's crazy, but I'm holding his hand. So his hand, he knows where it's at. Obviously, spelling to communicate is no touch. And so he struggles. He's still on the three board right now. He's
Well,
still,
that's because, right? Let's say why. Because facilitated communication got a bad rap 30 years ago because
Mhm.
they felt that the person that was supporting their arm was doing all of the spelling for them and it wasn't the actual person
Yeah,
spelling, right? So now S2C make sure they're completely hands off so that nobody can ever get accused of doing it for them. But when they can't feel their hands and they don't know where it is in space, sometimes they need that support.
yes. And so for him, he actually still does need some physical support. However, right now, where we're
Does he have
at, so
neuropathy?
I don't know.
Yeah.
I
It's just odd because I just heard a commercial on the radio when I was on my way home to do this interview, and they were talking about neuropathy, and I know Robbie had it. Robbie had it in
oh,
his hands and his
okay.
feet, and they said it can be tingling, it can be pain, or it can be numbness. And you don't know unless they tell you. So
And
I,
JD has always had something weird with his feet that we've never really
yep.
been able to figure out, like
Yeah, so
where.
you want to see a physiatrist. It's
Okay.
think of physical therapies. It's physiatrist. That's the type of doctor that you'll see to for
Oh,
that. And a lot of people have never heard of a
I have
physiatrist.
not. No,
So
thank you
just
so
it's just
much.
another thing to look into.
For sure. Yeah. So GD's obviously apraxia is a huge barrier for him with the spelling to communicate. We actually do give him some physical, but we are trying to fade that back very quickly. So right now, he kind of requires like a little bit of a bump on his elbow, like between each letter as like a reset, like here's where your arm is, now go for the next one. And our practitioner has been amazing with, helping me figure out how to not give like too much, but also to like enough that he can find some success.
Yeah.
So he's, really early on in the process of the three boards and just the known questions. But he makes amazing progress and he fights through, some lessons he's so calm and he does amazing. And then the next day you do it and he's very dysregulated and his body is not cooperating. And it's very, frustrating, but he'll spell to me, in our facilitated method, I want to keep going, even though I'm screaming, I want to get better.
Right.
So
Right. And that's the other thing that's just so wild to me. It's like there's two people going on, and their body's saying, I want to leave, go home, go home, go home. And then when they spell, they're like, no, I don't want to leave. I want to do this. Don't
Yes.
take me home. Don't listen to what's coming out of my mouth.
Yes.
Crazy.
And that's something that I wish more people knew because, sometimes it's like, it's hard. You look like you're manhandling them into doing something they don't want to do when
Right.
really you're encouraging and anchoring their body into actually doing what they do want to do.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. It's wild.
Yes.
Yeah, that was the other thing that I had wanted to get to was the apraxia. Yeah.
Mhm.
So yeah, and we talked about apraxia in other episodes. You can go back and watch some of my other episodes with Dana Johnson. She's the OT that started Speller's Method. She talks about it.
Okay.
So yeah, that's for my viewers that want to know more about that. So now your son wrote a message for me, right?
He did. Yes. Let me pull
Because he's
that
in
up.
summer school, so he's not on with us, but he did spell something for me, which I'm really happy to know that he did
Yes.
that.
He is in summer school, but I asked him when we were laying in bed the other night if he wanted me to say any of his words on the show, and he said yes.
Mhm.
And so he spelled out this message. He said, I am forever changed by spelling to communicate. I am not the same person I used to be. I am a new person, and my hopes are coming true. I am now able to tell my good mom, love me in your mind when I am under spiritual attack. And we kind of talked about that. I am able to make my own choices. I am able to be a hope giver and God's good child. I am a hopeful boy in the Lord. I love to be in God's good youth, which I'll talk about in a second. And I have purpose and make life meaningful by loving God.
Love it.
So he feels, his purpose is to point others to Christ, and he focuses on that pretty much all day, every day, um, even through apraxia and other challenges. That is always his main motivator in everything.
Yeah.
Um, God's good youth is a term that he uses quite a bit. And from my understanding of what he says, it refers to this little army of spellers that are being raised up and receiving training on the hill or in the realm, whatever we want to call it, basically at the foot of Jesus. And he sees a divine purpose in what that little group of people is going to do. And so he calls it God's good youth. I don't know if any of,
Does Jesus come to the hill?
I
I've never
hesitate.
heard them say that.
I hesitate to say that. He talks about encountering Jesus, but I don't know if it's on the hill.
I think,
I
yeah, they've never said that. That's where they go to talk to each other. But so where did he say he
there's
learns from Jesus? Did
at
Jesus is teaching
times,
them? Okay.
yes. Um, and like I said, there's still so much of it that's a mystery.
Yeah.
A lot of times when we press him on some of these things, it's like,
He's
I'm
not
telling
allowed to
you
talk.
what you need to know, and
Yes.
you're asking
Yes.
questions I'm not going to answer. So
Well,
there's,
I listen to a lot of near-death experiences and things like that.
yeah,
And people will say, I can only tell you part. I
mhm,
cannot tell you everything that I saw. Like they're not allowed to, there's things they're not allowed to say. So I'm
yes.
not surprised that been told that. It's like, I can
Mhm.
tell you so much, but that's it.
Yes. And I think there's a part of it that's like, whatever instruction he's under, and a part of it where he knows, like, I feel like since this has started, he has revealed things in like bite-sized pieces
Yeah.
that he knows that we can also digest, because sometimes even a bite-sized piece is like too much. You know what I mean? For my
Yes.
little human brain that hasn't seen these things and is trying to make sense. And
Yeah.
what I know for sure is that he sees the spiritual realm and the physical realm all
Yep.
the time, always.
Right.
As clear as you and I see cars driving down the road, he sees angels, he sees demons, he sees the interactions between them, he sees the way that they affect people. We kind of joke that it's dangerous to be around him, because if you come to my house, it's 50-50 if he's going to be like, look, you've got a demon of fear on you and we're going to cast you out. He doesn't
Yes.
hold back. He
Yes.
just has a purpose and he just walks forward in it, and he's not inhibited by a lot of those fears that, we deal with and sharing our faith or, ministering to other people. He doesn't even think about that. So,
Yeah, yeah, it's amazing. And I've been in non-denominational churches forever, and the prophetic movement has been really big for the past 10 years or whatever. And so you'll get somebody who's a preacher, public speaker, a prophet, and they'll come in and they see the demons or, whatever. And we put them up on this huge pedestal because it's like, wow, I can't believe that they can see that because the rest of us can't. And meanwhile, there's all these kids that are walking around with all this gifting,
mhm.
um, like it's an everyday thing with them,
Yes.
you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah, it's always been that way. They've never known it any different.
Mhm.
And it makes so much sense now, especially knowing that, like, when we're reading the Bible, he's seeing angels. Like, yeah, he's really hyped up about that. There was one night we were reading the Bible and he kept running to his window and his curtain was closed and he kept pulling it back and like looking out and just jumping and flapping his hands. And I'm like, JD, what is going on? Like, this is even crazier than normal. And he
Mhm.
said, there is a new believer. Someone has just been baptized and the angels are rejoicing.
Oh,
And I mean, it just put goosebumps on me because I'm like outside of our window, and
right.
everywhere it's just legions of angels and they're rejoicing just like the Bible says
Wow.
because, there's a new child of God. So
Wow. Has he ever been to heaven?
this is like a sticky again situation because he says he's described some things that sound like or seem like heaven, but I don't know how it all works and I don't want to like misspeak on
I'm
any of
only
it.
asking because Josiah said that
Yeah, I mean he does
Josiah
say that.
said he learns in heaven. Like he says he goes to school in heaven and comes
Yes,
back.
he JD has said that he has seen the throne room of God and he has described it to us and
Right.
he um beyond that I don't know a lot about what else he has seen because he won't entertain a lot of questions about it. um but he also tells us, so Josiah and Houston are both like big inspirations to him,
Mhm.
and he tells us that he's a prophet in training.
Okay.
So he, sometimes does speak prophetic words. There was, a morning a couple weeks ago. It was actually a Sunday morning, and I woke up and I had just gotten out of bed and I felt completely fine. And he said, "You're very hopeless today, and you're going to need a lot of hope."
Mhm.
And the whole day, I felt so off, and I couldn't explain it. Um, and so he does things all the time where I'm like, he does seem to see things ahead. He has spelled a lot of messages that sound prophetic. He talks about a lot being ready. Right now is a time for us to be ready because Jesus is coming, and we're like, coming when? Coming how soon? How much time do we have?
Mhm.
And he doesn't entertain that, those types of questions.
Mhm.
But just being ready and making sure that we're all doing, the work of God that he's put before us every day because, the time is coming no matter how soon, we all have a purpose every day to live out, the mission that he's given us. And so, he does, speak some prophecy, and I get the impression that maybe that will grow over time.
Sure. He's only
But
13.
mhm, yeah.
Yeah. Has he ever told you what your gift is? If his is hope, has he ever said anything like that to you?
He has. So I actually am starting to look at some of the gifts a little bit differently. I used to think that God just like gave the gift of healing to certain people. And the more I interact with the gifts and the more I like see them play out, I actually think that God gives different gifts within different moments. Like if you are one-on-one with someone and they need healing and you're praying with them, I truly believe that whether you have a history of being a healer, you could through the love of God heal a person. My one of mine is actually to cast off demons, and I believe that that is probably because he is frequently under demonic attack. And I shared a little bit about that earlier, how especially if his angel is called away, but he goes to battle with demons for people who are hopeless, and so because of that, they attack him, and
Yep.
he is under a lot of stress and attack from that. I actually had to reach out to Tani and say, like, I am so scared. I don't know what's going on. I don't know what to do about this.
Yep.
Pastor Joe, and I don't know if you've interviewed him, Joe and Franco. He's the pastor that's mentioned on the telepathy tapes. He is amazing. He has a community of spellers at his church.
Oh, right. Yes.
Who have some varying gifts and have seen, a lot of these things. And so he was also one of the first ones who really walked alongside us when we were like terrified. And, he's like, no, you don't need to give, anything dark any more power than what it
Right.
has. Like the blood of Jesus, like demolishes them. You just pray them off and they're gone.
Yeah.
And that's how we, handle that now.
Yeah, that's good to know. Yeah, I will interview him because one of my friends, her son, he's been spelling, a little here and there, but then she really buckled down and started working on it with him, and he became open, and he right away started saying the devil's in the garage. He sees these demons and stuff, and he was freaking her out.
Mm-hmm.
And so she's like, I don't think that I want to do spelling with anyone else because I don't want this stuff to start coming out of all these kids, you know? It's like, well, they need to spell, so we need to learn how to handle this aspect as
Mhm.
well. So,
Absolutely. Yeah, there's been some bumps in the road, but God is good and he's helped us navigate through and just I think we're definitely growing in discernment. We're growing in recognizing, when he's under distress if he hasn't told us yet. We're growing in, not giving too much attention to it. It's like, okay, let's just stop and take a minute and let's just pray through this, and then it's done. So, it's been a learning curve, but it's been one. Thankfully, I always tell Katie and Tani, I don't know how you guys did this when nobody else knew what to do in these situations. Like we've been blessed that we've had all these people to reach out to.
yeah,
So,
yeah. But there's this story where he 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 was used to doing deliverance ministry and all that kind of stuff, and he woke up one time in the middle of the night, and he said the devil was sitting on the end of his bed, and he looked at him and said, "Oh, it's you," and he went back to sleep like he wasn't afraid of him at all, where the rest of us would freak out, you know?
yes, yes, yes. Mhm.
Yeah, so that's why you have to know your authority and you need to understand spiritual warfare and all of
Mhm.
that. So, okay. So let's wrap up. We've been on for an hour. I saw on your Facebook that you are trying to get some legislation passed in Illinois. So, and you
We're
said
in
it's in Georgia, so you must be copying what Katie's trying to do in Georgia, I'm guessing.
Yeah, so Katie has been a huge inspiration for us. So she started, New York just passed their communication bill, which specifically spells out spelling as a method of communication that needs to be respected and accepted in schools. So Katie's pushing for that to, go through in Georgia, and we just started the petition to get it started in Illinois. Our story alone. I did a Google Meet, and it was with a speech teacher and a teacher just to say, hey, JD's doing this. I'm not expecting you to be doing this. He's not even necessarily doing this reliably for like his dad or other people, but I just want you to know that like he's had a huge communication breakthrough, and this is what he's doing. And he will answer yes and no questions for a lot of people, using this board. So it might be something in that aspect. And they pretty much were like, yeah, that type of communication was disproven decades ago.
Right.
And so,
Which is what I was mentioning before. Yeah.
yeah, we're kind of in a waiting period right now with
Mhm.
school where he needs to get a little bit more
Right.
proficient on, the letterboard
Right.
and be able to spell with more than just me before we can push for that. But it's sad that, that you
This
have
is what's so frustrating is because they won't even listen to you. They won't even give it a chance because they're like, nope, I've been told that this has been disproven.
yes,
ASHA says blah blah,
yes.
right?
And
And
that in
it's 30
schools.
years old. This information is from 30 years ago. Like, come on, let's go. It's
Yeah.
time for an update.
Yeah, exactly. So yes, we have a Facebook page called Jay's Journey, just capital J apostrophe S Journey,
Mhm.
that we just shared it on, along with some words that JD spelled out about why he thinks you should sign the petition, super powerful. So we would love for people to find the petition and sign it there.
Great.
And we also document a lot of his journey on the page there too.
Great. And that's on Facebook.
It is on Facebook,
Okay.
yes.
Instagram or no?
I'm not, no.
Okay.
Facebook
Just so
is
people know where to find you.
yeah,
Okay. Because a lot of people do both because they're connected. So you can post on Insta and it automatically goes on Facebook.
I really
and
need
get
to
both
figure
at the
that
same
out.
time. Yeah.
Yes,
Well, ask your kids. They're the ones
exactly.
that know.
I'm sure my daughter could help me.
Yeah, it's pretty easy. It's if I can figure it out, anybody can figure it out. You just when you're on Instagram, you just connect the pages because they're both owned by Meta. And
Okay.
you just post there, it'll go right over. You hit both two in one.
Okay. Well,
So
thank you so much.
you're welcome. Well, thank you for being on. I really appreciate you coming on to share your story and JD's story.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Okay, have a great day.
You too.
That's it for today's episode. I hope you enjoyed listening and it helped you gain a new perspective. To learn more about our children's book series, Robbie's World and His Spectrum of Adventures, or to learn more about what we do at Robbie's World Foundation, simply visit our website at robbiesworldbook.com.
Thank you for joining us today. Be sure to join us again on our next episode of Spectrum Perspectives.